It's the World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. Joining us, Hamdan Mostafavi, editor-in-chief of Courrier International, which brings the world's press to France, translated into French.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us. Thanks as well to Paris-based German reporter Ulrike Koltermann. How are you?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Guten Abend.
All right. Good evening as well to Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the digital website The Modern World.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
And we're joined as well by Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Where does one find World Politics Review?
Well, this week you can find an article of ours in Courrier International.
Okay. All right. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. It's been 10 days since Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The journalist and critic of the current leadership in Riyadh went to collect a document on the eve of his wedding. He hasn't been seen since. Authorities have in Turkey have since fed the media with tales of a 15-person squad flying out the same day aboard 2 private jets, speculation about what happened inside the consulate and at the Saudi consul's residence. A contributor to the Washington Post's opinions page, it's chilling to hear about Khashoggi spoken of in the past tense by Jason Rezaian of the Washington Post.
He was a very unique and kind of clear voice on the Saudi experience for our readers, something that people in the United States and people in most parts of the world don't often get. You know, he was doing a wonderful job of giving voice to a country of people who don't have a big voice in the world, and also, offering criticism and advice almost to a government that he saw as kind of off the rails.
Off the rails, Hamdan Mostafavi.
Yes, we've been publishing for years, actually, articles from Khashoggi in Courrier International, translated into French, because he has been a very unique voice about Saudi Arabia. You don't know much about Saudi Arabia, and particularly the last year, we've seen the Crown Prince, Mohammed Ben Salman, trying to show off that he was, changing the country, making reforms. That's our cover story this week.
Let me see the cover here.
Yeah, this week it's about the way he's been.
The Merchant of Illusions.
Yeah, he's been showing off. He spent a month in the U.S. He met Donald Trump. He met the Queen of England, and kind of letting women to drive and allowing them in football stadium. And suddenly it's like everybody discovers with this unexpected and crazy event that it's not really what the world was thinking.
Ulrike Koltermann?
I mean, it sounds like Pulp Fiction, and it is happening in Europe. And what is really shocking is that the lack of reaction by European international governments. There are no sanctions. Just imagine if it had been an Iranian journalist disappearing, a Russian journalist disappearing. So there's a very little reaction. Everyone is saying, let's find out if it was really true. But the hints are so clear that there should be much more
speaking
reaction.
a short while ago to France 24, the French President
but
Macron
now,
saying
today,
we don't have all the facts yet, is what he said.
Yeah, but it's still there are enough facts that he can still do more to get an answer. There are so many questions open, and the Saudis don't react.
I mean, Trump, even Donald Trump said clearly that this is very damaging to the relationship and there should be proof that this journalist is alive if the regime is saying that he has nothing to be blamed for. So it shows that Saudi, if they want to be a real big country that is matters on the international stage, they have to change the way they approach power. It can't be these big families playing power in the desert. Now they have a clear guidelines and a clear plan to modernize Saudi Arabia and change the way they actually do things. There is a world around them, and most of the time they forget this. And clearly, this time it's might be a wake-up call for the Saudi
Might
regime.
be a wake-up call. We've seen the cable news network CNBC, the Financial Times, Uber's CEO, AOL's founders those are just some of those who've pulled out of an upcoming Saudi investment conference in protest over the disappearance of Khashoggi. Richard Branson as well. The president of the World Bank says he's now got a scheduling conflict. He won't be going either. And while both Republicans and Democrats in Washington talk of sanctions against the kingdom, Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary is still going, and the boss is saying, wait and see.
I would not be in favor of stopping a country from spending $110 billion, which is an all-time record, and letting Russia have that money and letting China have that money.
Judah Grunstein.
Well, there are a few parts of this story that strike me. The first is how shocking it is. The second, how not shocking it is. It's shocking because of some of the allegations, the reports. They're pretty gruesome and heinous, and especially that it took place in a consulate, which is as close to a secular sanctuary as exists. Everyone who lives outside of their country needs to enter into a consulate at some point or another. And so it really does need to be a safe space. And clearly that was violated here. So in that sense, it's really shocking. Why it's not shocking is because we've seen already that the story of Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as he's known, as the great reformer of Saudi Arabia, we know that anyone who's been paying attention and anyone who knows what's going on there knows that that hasn't been true for a long time. He's been detaining wealthy Saudi citizens and business people, including members of the royal family, in an anti-corruption sweep that was essentially a shakedown. He's responsible for the war in Yemen, which, if it hasn't been directly targeting civilians, has been extremely reckless in terms of not avoiding civilian casualties, and a host of other things, including recently imprisoning dissidents in Saudi Arabia. So to the extent that people are surprised, it's that they haven't really been paying attention. There's also another element, and it's a parallel storyline to MBS, the Great Reformer, which is that he's been extremely impetuous and reckless in terms of his policies. The military intervention in Yemen, the blockade of Qatar, these decisions that he's taken, essentially concentrating power in Riyadh, and making these decisions without really consulting allies, without consulting partners. And the fact that he would actually feel emboldened to do something like this, and shows that he really expected there would be no consequences in the U.S.-Saudi relationship, and that basically he had carte blanche. Another example of him being reckless, but also I think of his reading of Donald Trump, that it's transactional, and I bought him with $110 billion of arms sales.
Yeah,
But if it was, I mean, we all know that he has a very bad record, but this would be a real escalation. It's a method of Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, and they were not business partner and allies.
Yeah, but he knows that he has an ally in Trump, because the thing is that MBS is seen as Trump as anything but Iran. So he feels that if he helps MBS to win the regional war with Iran, he can have. He doesn't really care what's going on with the rest of it. And I don't really believe that there will be a backlash, because recently.
You don't believe there'll be a backlash?
No, because recently there have been two important countries, which are Germany and Canada, who have at multiple occasions talked about their concerns about human rights. There have been spat, there's been diplomatic issues, but in the end, these countries they gave up, because there's no way to find middle ground with this regime.
All right, our partners for the show, the Daily Beast, the first to report that Khashoggi was working quietly with intellectuals, reformists, and Islamists to launch a media advocacy group called Democracy for the Arab World Now, or DAWN, and that this was about to happen when he was disappeared, which is what we can only presume at this particular point in time. What's interesting, you talk, Hamdam, about him writing for your paper. He was very careful to say he's not a dissident, but a critic. He'd had ties to high ups in power before. He was an insider, definitely.
Yeah, and he was self-exiled, so he wasn't thrown out of the country. He left the country at some point because he felt like it was better for him to work there. But he had contacts with some of the princes in Riyadh, and we published this week one of his articles where he advises the prince. He doesn't critique the prince. He says, "Oh, that's what you should do if you want really to modernize Saudi Arabia."
But the good thing in the story is that there is this conference where more and more business leaders and media are pulling out, and this is a huge signal, and it means that they're actually reacting more than state governments.
Yeah, the limit to that is that all the funds, the BlackRocks of this world, Christine Lagarde and anything, they are
He's
still
on the list.
planned. Yeah, well, I've seen the list. And what is the end of the issue is that you say there won't be a backlash because Saudi Arabia is a good client to everyone in the global system of money making, petrol, oil, and whatever. So France is very shy, Germany is very shy, Europe will be very shy, the US can say a few things.
Well,
but
let me
it's
get
all
your
about
reaction
markets.
to this. In the midst of the uproar, Saudi Arabia discreetly withdrawing its bid to join the Francophonie, the club of French-speaking nations with observer status. They're gathered in Yerevan, the Armenian capital. Your thoughts on that, on Saudi Arabia, A, wanting to join, and then B, withdrawing?
Wanting to join, it's
candidates.
part of the plan that where they want to be an international recognized country that matters on the international stage. They've done a lot at the UN, so it makes sense to them to be everywhere where there is international talking, even if it's in French. No, withdrawing, I think it's a good thing. There have been some advice from Morocco, from Senegal, from France even, saying it might not be the right timing to do so. But it says clearly that if you want to have a say at this table or any international table, you can't just be all about image and pretending. You have to show the proof and make sure the regime is actually changing for real, for good. Because this clientelism, the fact that you're buying a lot of arms and weapons and stuff, there will be a limit to that to some extent. And I think that's where Qatar is more clever in many ways, where they have tried to do sports and more like the soft diplomacy, soft power, compared to what Riyadh is doing right now.
When he's
I'd be just a little more nuanced in terms of whether or not there will be consequences. I think clearly $110 billion arms deals, those aren't the kinds of deals that get canceled.
No.
And the kinds of transactional relationships that exist between the U.S. and Europe and the Gulf countries in general aren't the kinds of relationships that can be set aside strategically and financially. These countries have poured enormous amounts of investment into Western Europe and into the U.S. At the same time, there's a couple elements where there might be some consequences. The first is that the U.S. actually doesn't even have an ambassador in Saudi Arabia right now. So that relationship has been managed personally by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump. And the fact that this scandal will become personally attached to him, I think will have some consequences in terms of how the U.S. manages the relationship, might get it to a more professional setting, a more professional footing with a foreign service officer or an ambassador managing the relationship. And that would put a few more checks and balances on MBS as he moves forward. There might also be some sanctions around the royal family or around his entourage, just to keep him in check a little bit. There might also be some sort of token releases from prison, true reforms in the kingdom. So again, I don't think there's anything that can make up for the crime that was committed, but there might be some token gestures and a little more holding of his feet to the fire moving forward.
on the hashtag world this week, lots of reactions. This one, the Khashoggi story, is horrific, of course. I'm having a hard time understanding the surprise. The Saudis have been responsible for atrocity after atrocity. And Trump's comments are an honest statement of our long-standing policy towards them, says that viewer. There's another player in all of this that we haven't really brought up so far, and this happened on Turkish soil, and it seems to be sparking some kind of a rapprochement, a warming of relations between Washington and Ankara over all of this, Ulrike Kollerman.
Well, the Turkey doesn't have a good record of keeping human rights, and they are throwing journalists into jail. But in this case, it's true. The Turkish were asking louder than anyone else to clarify the situation. So I think in that case, they should be supported.
If you see the global competition in the Middle East to be the leader of the Middle East, it's also serves Turkey to say that somebody is worse than them, and doing the same thing on their soil. So it helps them to have to look better than Saudi Arabia.
But more specifically, Turkey came to Qatar's aid
Yeah, of
when
course.
the Saudis and the Emiratis blockaded Qatar. So there's definitely some scores to settling there. There's also, though, I don't think any country or any leader can countenance this sort of thing taking place on their soil and not pushing back extremely vigorously and robustly because, again, even if the Saudi compound is considered Saudi sovereign territory inside Turkey, that it's Turkey, it's Istanbul, that's Erdogan's hometown. He can't let that happen on Turkish soil. Having said that, his security guards beat up protesters in Washington D.C. So again, the track records here, there aren't really very many good guys in the story, except Jamal Khashoggi.
It happened with the Iranian Shah, well, the beating of protesters. You have to be very careful about this. Maybe you should take some advice with Putin about using Novichok instead. But
Okay. The one final word on this: the French president, in his interview with France 24 and Radio France International, saying that because he was asked about the arms sales to Saudi Arabia, and he said, "Well, first of all, we're not that big an arms exporter to." But he also said that we're not a major arms seller, and he also said in French diplomacy, politics trumps the economy.
no, really he said that? Yeah, but no. Honestly, the economy has been the key. I mean, we are an arms selling nation, France. I'm talking as a French citizen. This is all, I mean, you look at the big power of this world, they are the biggest arms seller of this world. And surely France is one of the big weapon seller in the region. Maybe we're not number one in Saudi Arabia, but we're trying hard. And I can see how, I mean, this is clearly what is going wrong in this world, like pretending not, but doing absolutely the opposite whenever we can. And clearly where the problem lies is that we can't be honest in international policy with human rights, with trying to make this place a good place or make planet great again, as long as we're just dealing arms and that the core of our economies.
All right. French public opinion, though, more concentrated on his remarks about whether or not how big a reshuffle than about Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, that's that's the adventure in France. Yes, you have this reshuffle now and again.
And people care more about that than about.
Yes, they try not to see where the money comes from. You know, it's easy.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at that summit of French-speaking nations. A lot happened. Stay with us. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Hamdan Mostafavi, editor-in-chief of Courrier International, the news weekly that brings you the best of the world's press in French.
And every day on our website.
And every day on the website as well. Ulrike Kolderman, Paris-based German correspondent. Alexis Poulain, co-founder of Le Monde Moderne, the digital news website, The Modern World.
It is.
Just like in the song by the Jam. And also with us, Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. We heard Hamdan Mostafavi mention Canada, which has had its diplomatic spats with Saudi Arabia. Canada booted from the leadership of the Francophonie at a summit that's just finished in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. Enter Rwanda, its foreign minister Louise Mukeshiwabo replacing Michael Jean as Secretary General. Quite a feat for Rwanda, a nation where French is no longer the first language in school since 2010, a former Belgian colony where Ugandan-backed rebellion ousted French-trained troops during the 1994 genocide. Louise Mukeshiwabo, herself perfectly bilingual. Not so the boss, however, Paul Kagame, who only speaks in English.
Yeah, sure. He grew up in exile in Uganda, so he made English more important language in Rwanda. He even pushed French aside, and Rwanda is now part of Commonwealth, which is, I mean...
So explain to us then what the Francophonie is all about.
Francophonie is a weird club. I mean, it's so weird that even Saudi Arabia wanted to participate.
Why?
Nearly everyone can participate officially if they share some values, but now they have a big debate because the values might not be shared by Rwanda. But then again, the French say it's not about the country that's the leadership, but it's about the person. And I think it is good news that there is an African female leader of an international organization. That's still rare enough. It's good news. But there is an aspect that it has something of a French-Rwandan deal. There's more behind why the Canadians are not leading it anymore. Why is there a Rwandan foreign minister?
Well, sources tell RFI that they've been promised a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council. There's all kinds of dealings going on.
I mean, just remember when Paul Kagame mentioned for the first time that the foreign ministry would be a candidate. He did it in Paris and he did it in English. And then Macron was the first one to support it. So that really means that there is something else behind. It's like a gesture in a very long conflict between France and Rwanda about French complicity in the genocide. And the foreign minister lost most of her family in genocide, and she survived because she was in exile. But it's still a burning issue. And she also asked France to open the archives, and they are still not open, even if officially France told several times that they would open the archive. It's not open anymore. And now when the Rwandan foreign minister becomes head of the Francophonie, she won't ask that question anymore.
All right. So we've been mentioning, and the question was put to her even about, and to Rwanda's president who was interviewed by us, about the release of those 2,000 prisoners, including the opposition leader in the build-up to the vote. I'm going to read to you, Judah, what this one viewer says. The unanimous endorsement of Mukishiwabo as the next Secretary General mirrors Rwanda's choice of consensus politics in the post-genocide era, for which it has often come under harsh criticism. It doesn't always have to be confrontational.
Well, I'm not going to necessarily endorse that interpretation, but what I would say is this. First of all, there was a lot of confusion when Kagame started releasing people. There was a lot of uncertainty and questioning about what was going on. If it does turn out to be a quid pro quo for the running the Francophonie summit or organization, again, we talked about the cynicism of Macron when it comes to Saudi Arabia. And in international relations and power politics, oftentimes human rights clearly takes a backseat to national interest, to weapons deals, to economic interest. At the same time, 2,000 people out of jail is 2,000 people out of jail, and that really impacts their lives. And when states that do advocate for human rights can, at the margins, pull a string or two, and in return for a deal like this, get a couple thousand people out of jail, it doesn't make up for the times when Western European countries and the U.S. are inconsistent and don't model that behavior. At the same time, it's not nothing. And so if when those states don't do it, things are worse than when they do.
Hamdan Mostafadi, also this is a tale of the Francophonie's growing clout, and it does have growing clout. More and more people want to join the club.
Yeah.
84 countries in some capacity or another now are with 54 full members. And the French language is growing.
Yeah, maybe the French language is growing. Maybe with Brexit, we will see the French language gaining importance again. But now you have...
Joking aside, it's mostly on the African continent.
Of course. So I would say that it's not so strange that it's coming back to an African country, because actually most of the members of Francophonie are from Africa. So why a Canadian? It was also an odd choice, and it's not so bad that it's coming back to Africa. And then what you have to take into account is that now Paul Kagame is the man everybody wants to be with.
President of the African Union right now?
Yes, he is. He's not, of course, a Democrat. He's been running his third mandate, and he's planning to stay in power until 2034. But he has been quite better on the economic issues. So that's why everybody wants now to jump on the train with him.
Next April will be the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. At times, people have given Rwanda a bit of a free pass when it comes to human rights abuses. When does that start to wear thin?
I don't know. I think this we'll have to wait and see. But clearly, as you said, it's a step by step. As long as you can help countries to go on the way to more democracy, more freedom, and make sure that this nightmare will never happen again. It's a good thing to have. The question of this nomination is clearly, is it a move to protect France on its implication during the genocide, and not to open the archive and saying, oh, forget about France, we were clean on this one. Of course, and that's where we have to raise question. But as you said, if it helps on one hand, but memories of victims, still, we families want to have the truth. So.
But in terms of historical memory, Macron so far has a relatively good record in terms of
it was Algeria
during the campaign with Algeria and taking those first steps. So I'd be curious to see how he manages that with regard to Rwanda moving forward.
And he has an invitation to come visit from Paul Kagame. The Francophonie celebrates language in both words and music this time. First, there was Louise Mukeshiwabo herself displaying her moves in Yerevan ahead of the vote. There she is, dancing. And by the way, her dancing seemed contagious. Her rival for the top job, a gracious loser, Michael Jean, who we could show you in that scrum during the dinner on Thursday night, a scrum that includes the first couples of France, Armenia, Chad's president, Prince Albert of Monaco. Let's turn to our dance critic, Ulrika Kolderman, on this one.
It looks as if Macron is so happy not to be in Paris right now.
Is that Theresa May who started the whole thing about the dancing?
Speaking of the weirdness of the Francophonie Summit, what was it doing in Armenia? It doesn't really top the list of
there's a lot of French speaking, like it's an old thing.
Yeah, expats maybe, the diaspora, but is French widely spoken in
That's
Armenia?
where Francophonie is kind of a dysfunctional commonwealth for France. You know, there's a bit of like, oh, we used to be there, but...
Right.
Right, here's a tale which could be from the Francophonie. His dad is Cameroonian, his mom Algerian, and he hangs his hat at Paris Saint-Germain Football Club. Mbappe fever gripping not just France. He dons the cover of the international edition of Time magazine this week with Vivian Walt sitting down with the boy wonder of Les Bleus in the working class suburb of Bondy. And we've talked about this before, Judah Grunstein, about the lesson of 1998, the year, by the way, in which Mbappe was born, when all of France hailed the multiculturalism of its football team, not to repeat the mistake twice. So what's your reaction when you see this cover?
My reaction, I mean, for Mbappe, it's great. He's a kid at the top of his game, at the top of the world. I mean, fantastic. After that, it becomes complicated because anytime you get that kind of celebrity or that kind of popularity, people want to use you. They want to instrumentalize what your image means and what it means to who. What was interesting to me about the French World Cup victory this time is that instead of the sort of harmony message, there was this argument between a American or South African comic who hosts an American late night show and the French ambassador to the U.S. over whether the French team was Africa won the World Cup or France won the World Cup. And this question of French identity and immigrant identity and things like that. So clearly we're not in the same kind of period of 98 where everything was idealized. But I think that he needs to be careful about who uses his image for what.
Now, in the interview, it's not about Africa. It's about giving back to Bondy, this working class suburb of Paris.
In France, it's definitely not about Africa, not about football. It's about French identity. Mm-hmm. And many people now say that it might change the look of the suburbs. But it's like you said, the parallel with 98, the bleu, black beurre, what they said, the French flag, that there were white people, people of Arab origin and black people in the same team. But that enthusiasm didn't last long. And the new enthusiasm for the suburbs won't last long either.
I don't agree so much because when France won, we made a cover story. We said Génération Bleu. This time it's not black, blanc, beurre. It's we were all blue. We were all gained by this, and this is a generation that I think is more integrated into France, and it's a good story. That's the France everybody wants to see. The thing is now we have to go in other domains than football. But now this generation is also gaining on other fronts, on TV, on many other issues. So
Yeah, winning the World Cup before his 20th birthday, not enough for Mbappe, it seems. Last night, he saved his country from humiliation by provoking one goal and scoring another against Iceland. These are images from last Sunday in league play. The PSG striker netted 4 goals in 13 minutes against Lyon, one of the strongest sides in France. Has he reached the pinnacle of his art already?
No, I think I can do better. Since the return from suspension, my performances are good, but they are not extraordinary. I think today was an ultra-efficient performance, even if I can be even more efficient.
I know those are the usual talking points for athletes, but he has this incredible poise for a 19-year-old.
It's amazing, yeah, and not only about sport, but I think he's a very good model for the kids watching football, because all the values that he's putting there is a lot of work, a lot of effort, and being humble and modest about this. He's not saying that he's going to be the best. He just said that I can still improve. It's not the bragging that you used to have in some star of the football in other countries, or even in France. We have that before, so it's very different. And I think that's where Mbappe is very different from the others. And this generation, this team, all the players were playing in a team. They were not there for being the best.
Yeah. What I like best about him is that he donated the money he made with the World Cup.
All of them,
and he gave
actually.
it to a charity that teaches sports to sick and disabled children. So this is something for a 19-year-old really impressive.
What I was going to say really quickly, though, is this year's French team, starting from the coach on down, it seems like they all took master classes in communication skills. So the messaging was all about unity and harmony and national identity.
They were
had
on
fun.
message for
The
sure.
answer is they had fun.
A very different Europe rearing its head in next Sunday's regional elections in Bavaria. The far-right AfD expected to sap support from the longtime rulers of the southern German region, the conservative CSU party, which has been in power for 61 years.
We want to protect our borders better. We don't want illegal immigrants crossing our borders. We want to stop the economic immigration and restore peace and order in the country.
Restore peace and order in the country. Now, Ulrike Kollermann.
These elections have hijacked Germany.
We're talking
for
about the
months
richest
now.
region in
It's a
Germany,
regional
right?
election, yeah, but still, it's an historic election because they're going to lose their absolute majority, and they have had it mostly for the most time of more than 6 decades. So it is important, and it's also important because it's going to send shockwaves up to Berlin. If the government, if they have to form a coalition, on the short run, it's good news for Merkel because she might lose the interior minister, who is also head of the CSU, Seehofer. She was always fighting with him, so he might be the scapegoat and he might be on his way out. But then on the long term, if the government in Bavaria is weak, then it means also her coalition is even weaker than before. So it's something that Germany is really looking at very
Angela
carefully.
Merkel earlier in the week called for the end of infighting within the center-right family. However, she was conspicuously absent from the last campaign rally of CSU leader Markus Söder. Instead, he campaigned alongside Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, who over in Vienna is himself in a coalition with the far right, Alexis Poulain.
Yeah, it says a lot about the state of the coalition and what's left of Merkel's power. Clearly, she will blame the CSU for this and saying, I don't want to have anything to deal with this. But this rise of the extreme, and all of this Bavarian election, they're all trying to be the further closest to the AfD, because you can only win against this guy if you just say the same thing, do the same thing, which is wrong. I think it's
All right,
absolutely the
not
opposite
everybody's
that you
trying to get closer to the AfD.
No, the Greens are there.
The AfD stealing votes from the mainstream right, the Bavarian Greens taking votes from the Social Democrats, with a fresh 33-year-old face to lead them in Katharina Schulze.
We have to stand in the way of anyone who wants to destroy our Europe, no matter if it's Orban, Kurz, Salvini, or people in our own country. We are pro-Europe. We in Bavaria are pro-Europe, and we won't let our Europe be destroyed.
Do you remember when politics used to be boring in Germany?
Well, now the politics are not boring in any countries in
Yeah.
Europe because you know now we are facing everywhere in Europe. We are facing it in Italy. We face it in France. We are facing it everywhere. There is these two images of Europe, of welcoming Europe, of unity in Europe, or the closing down our borders, what led to Brexit, what led to Salvini in Italy. It's always these two visions fighting, and there too, it's what we can see.
There's also the two visions of how to fight the far right and the extremes in general. Do you move closer to them, or do you move further away from them? And I think that if the CSU does suffer for having moved closer to them, it could serve as a model for other parties in Europe for how to respond in a different way.
Well, let me ask Ulrike Coleman. The people who are going to vote for the Greens, is it just a protest vote against the traditional mainstream parties, against the SPD, or do people believe in the Greens message?
There are even voters who come from CSU because C in the party name stands for Christian. And a lot of Christian voters are disappointed by the anti-immigrant immigration stance. So the church has always supported. They were pro-refugee. And so Greens get a lot of voters from the SPD, which is sort of dead, but also from the CSU. So we talk a lot about the rise of the AfD, the far right, but there's also the rise of the Greens, which is very important. It could be the second state. It's happening in Baden-Württemberg already that they are governing together, this CDU and the Greens. And this could also be a model for Berlin one day.
I just wanted to get back to something that Hamdan said, because I think it's very important. This question of hospitality versus closing the borders, closing the door. It's really an ethical choice. How do you respond to people who are in need? And I think that where Merkel was very courageous, but maybe wasn't very effective in the messaging, was that she took the stand for an ethical position. She didn't explain it, and she didn't fight in that way.
It's not coordinated in Europe, because I think there's a lot of need of clarification in Europe politics right now. And Jean-Claude Juncker just said today that Orban Fidesz has no place in the EPP, the main party of the
centre-right bloc of the European
but still,
Parliament.
Orban is there and pretending to be the right and legitimate right. So there's a lot of clarification that needs to be done right now about what is the program, where do you belong to,
what does Europe stand for? And I think that bringing it to an ethical position and an ethical clarity.
But outside of that, it's also the plans and does Europe work for that kind of big issues? So far, not.
Right. But migration is a big issue. But then you have to look at the figures. The problem was in 15, 16, and Germany can be quite proud how they handled the crisis. And the figures are down. Bavarian economy is blooming. So there is no reason they don't have migration problems. They have a problem because they handled it so badly.
All right, and that problem of perception, we're going to see how it plays out Sunday in the polls in those regional elections. Ulrike Kohlermann, I want to thank you. Judith Grunstein, Alexis Poulain, Hamdan Mustafavi. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Emma, we covered a lot of ground in today's show. Did we miss anything?
One or two things, but, it happens. Some things people won't be that worried about you having missed, because there was a small matter of a royal wedding in the United Kingdom today, but it does seem
wasn't that over the summer?
No, that was the last one back in May, Harry and Meghan. That's the one that people cared about. This one, not so much. There's been a lot of controversy about it. Obviously, some people marking it with happy images on social media, including, of course, the royal family's official account. The wedding was between Princess Eugenie, who is the Queen's granddaughter by Princess Andrew, and Jack Brooksbank, who is described variously as a wine merchant and also a brand ambassador for George Clooney's tequila, of all things. He was a notable absentee at the wedding, and there were lots of absentees in terms of viewers as well, it would appear. The Guardian describes this as a royal wedding redux, a reworking, if you like, because it is the same venue. It's Windsor Castle, where we saw Harry and Meghan get hitched back in May. And The Guardian says this wedding is just as lavish. It's just that it's not as high profile. Because, of course, Princess Eugenie, frankly, ninth in line to the throne, is nowhere near as important. But despite that, they actually invited 250 extra guests. Harry and Meghan just had 600. And Princess
Only
Eugenie,
600.
850.
850.
Yes, absolutely. There were, of course, supporters out on the streets. Some of them pictured here by the Guardian newspaper, obviously fervent royal fans. But a lot of people were really very unhappy about it. And yes, there were questions asked when Harry and Meghan got hitched too, but there does seem to be a much stronger line of unpopularity on this one. This person taking to Twitter to say, Princess Eugenie is getting married today. I hope she has a nice time, knowing that millions of pounds of taxpayers' money is being used for her special day while school children go hungry and rough sleepers are dying on the streets. Incidentally, the rough sleepers of Windsor were moved out of the way for the nuptials as they were for Harry and Meghan.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Republican, which is a pressure group that wants to do away with the monarchy altogether, unsurprisingly had this petition going, saying that no taxpayer money should be spent on this wedding. It reached almost 50,000 signatures. Incidentally, they did
in a nation of 60 million.
Yes, exactly. It is a relatively small number.
A long way to go for the
Absolutely. I mean, there aren't that many Republicans, although I think a lot more people are unhappy about the level of taxpayer money being used. Supposedly, the families were actually paying for the wedding, but because the couple decided they wanted an open-top carriage tour through Windsor, that actually jacked up the costs because of road closures and policing and stewarding and the like. So it's expected to cost at least $2 million just to...
$2 million?
Yes, just because they wanted to ride through the streets. Now, the Mirror are very unforgiving on this one. It's grotesque to lavish taxpayer cash on this royal wedding when universal credit, a form of benefits, is being cut back. The New York Times, though, seems to think that the British are being a bit churlish about this. This headline, Britain's gripe about the tax bill, because of course the Americans don't have anything like the royal family. However, the article is pretty fair and does talk about all the pros and cons.
The Americans never griped about a British tax bill.
Well, there is that, absolutely. So yes, it's interesting to see the different kind of views being taken. However, I think it's fair to say that it isn't all that popular amongst the great British public, because YouGov did a poll to find out how many people were actually going to tune in and watch this event. Harry and Meghan, of course, was a huge television event. 61% said, I definitely won't. 23% said, I probably won't. Only 2% said, I definitely will. And the BBC, the bastion of normally all matters
Well, it was a
royal.
weekday.
Yes, true. But the BBC ordinarily would never miss out on an event like this, but they decided not to bother broadcasting it live. That honour supposedly fell to ITV, the alternative. One thing that did go rather wrong on the BBC News Channel, I don't know if they were going rogue in protest, this gentleman saying either the subtitles machine is broken or the BBC News are getting rather personal about Princess Eugenie. Now, if you can't make out the words, there it is a bit bigger, not sure what a beautiful breasts, absolutely fitting her. Now, I think it's a voice recognition issue here, because clearly that was supposed to be what a beautiful dress. But it wasn't the only unfortunate moment of the day.
Well, they wanted to cut costs. Voice recognition.
A lot of people thought it was strange that there was a reading from The Great Gatsby done during the wedding by Princess Beatrice, the sister of Princess Eugenie. This person pointing out that maybe they haven't read it, seeing as they just read a passage about the smile of a con man about to massively defraud you. Other people pointing out that a very different break in tradition here, because Cara Delevingne, one of the celebrity guests, a model, broke with the normal tradition for women, going with what's traditionally the male outfit, top hat and tails. Lots of people seem to have appreciated that one. Many others gossiping about the fashion choice of Meghan Markle, now Duchess of Sussex, of course, because she had this open-bottomed coat, and people wondering whether that meant that there's a little bit of swelling going on, and could she be pregnant? Other things that, well, there was a very unfortunate moment. Lady Louise mounted the steps, accompanying the bridesmaids and all the little children, the flower bearers and the like. She's just 14 years old. It was a windy day. She was holding the hands of children. You can imagine what happened next. The wind took her skirt. I'm not going to show the image because it's hugely inappropriate. She's just 14 years old. Note to Lady Louise, says this person, it happens to all of us. You looked beautiful. Be proud.
All right. Well, we'll see if there's more coverage of it in Corrientes on this next week.
Of course, we won't miss that.
All right. I want to thank you, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here for The World This Week.